Thank you for joining me on the Hybrid Remote Center of Excellence. I'm Nola Simon, and today I'm going to have our guest introduce herself. She is an expert negotiator. She is the author of Say Less, Get More. She works with the Schulich School of Business, and she's an advisor for female executives. Would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Fotini Iconomopoulos. Sounds like a pasta, and you just look for the mop in the middle of the last name, and you'll be able to
Yeah,
find me anywhere online.
I was practicing it before I started, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to ask you to introduce because I don't want to make a mistake. Bettina, I would appreciate that. Thank you. One of the questions that I had for you is about how people lay the groundwork for future, because part of what we do on this podcast is we talk about excellence and how you negotiate hybrid remote, but it's also where do you want this to be in like 5 or 10 years from now?
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to say less and get more.
I would say in any type of negotiation, whether it is buying a souvenir on a beach in Mexico in the short term, or buying a house in the long term, or managing a career prospect in the long term, maybe it's building a business and a spin-off or something like that. Anything that you're doing, one thing I always tell people is know what you want to get out of it. What is your objective? And so when you know where you're going, you can plan a strategy to get there. And one of the things that I get called in to help companies with live negotiations, with high stakes negotiations all the time. And the higher the stakes, the longer it takes to negotiate those things. And one of the first things that we do is we plot out a strategic timeline. When do you want to get this thing done? Whether it's a price increase or a new launch or some kind of term agreement or whatever it is, when does that need to be completed? And then we start working backwards and going, what are some of the milestones that need to happen for that kind of thing? Who then needs to be involved? What are some of the things that could happen in that line of events? Maybe there's a blackout period because the holidays are too difficult to reach anybody. Maybe it's a blackout period because they're going to be super stressed at end of quarter, end of year, and so on. That is not when you're going to get the best of them. Maybe it is an ideal time because they're going to be super happy, and that is the moment to get everything that you want out of them. Anybody who has children knows that is a strategy that they use all the time. We start plotting out what is that timeline of events and who are the people involved. When you think about that timeline of events in your career, if you want to hit CEO, then you're starting to look at, okay, when do I want to have that happen? What needs to happen in the meantime? Who are the people making decisions for that? In terms of what needs to happen in the meantime, you have to have proven yourself. Well, what does proving yourself look like? What are the milestones that you need to hit? What kind of responsibilities do you need to have? What kind of wins do you need to have under your belt? And then you start plotting out those things as well. Then you start figuring, okay, if I need that win, who do I need to be involved in order to get there along the way? Who do I need to get on board with this idea? Who do I need to negotiate with to help me with this in order to get to where I want to go? It is thinking about what do I want to get out of this and when do I want that to happen, and then start working backwards from all of that. That's the first step in making sure that you are planning for success.
That's excellent. Now, do you actually find that any of this actually changes if you're doing it in person or remote? Like, what has been the impact on negotiation and strategy over the last few years?
I'd say one of the things, it's interesting because I have been working remotely for a long time. I was living in Toronto, working for a British company out of their New York office. Skype was something I was familiar with well over a decade ago. But what I did realize back then that has been carried over now is it's difficult to build relationships on something like a video platform. It's easy to maintain relationships there, but it's difficult to build trust. It's certainly better than being on the phone because they can see the look on your face, they can see the endearment, the sincerity, all of those kind of things. But it is hard to convey warmth through a screen. It's not impossible, just harder. I can still recall when I was working for this British company, I worked for them for 6 months before I ended up going into the London office. I had spent time in the New York office from the very beginning, and that's how I met everybody and got onboarded and all of that kind of stuff. And I'd have emails with lots of folks over in the UK. But the second I got there on the soil with them and spent time with them and had a coffee with them and just had a handshake or a hug or a face-to-face meeting, all of a sudden I was like, oh, you're the Fotini we've heard much about, or you're the person from my inbox. That's all of a sudden, it's like something changes and your relationship building takes a giant leap forward. And if you're starting it in the middle of a pandemic, if you're starting it with a new norm of doing things remotely, you're at a slight disadvantage. It's not so much that you're never going to catch up. It's just you have to make a lot more effort to get there. And if you consider the differences between when you show up for a meeting for the very first time with someone, if you were going to the financial district to have a meeting, one of those big towers, you would show up X minutes in advance. You'd make sure that you're there and saying hello to reception and maybe building some cordial relationship with that person. Then you're sitting there waiting and you see somebody walk in, and as they're walking in 10 meters away, you smile at them and you stand up and you collect your things. And as you're walking to that boardroom that starts the meeting, when the meeting starts at 12 o'clock exactly, they've come out a couple minutes before, they've asked you, do you want a drink or a coffee? They've offered you something. You're having some chit chat about the weather or what traffic was like when you got there. You get into the room and you sit down, and that's when the meeting starts. We've lost all of those steps along the way for relationship building. And the meeting starts at 12 o'clock and the Zoom enters, or the Skype or whatever it is you're using. And all of a sudden people assume it started at 12. We need to get down to business. You need to build in that time, that water cooler talk, that walk to the hallway, that extra bit of warmth, that extra smile that they saw happening 10 meters away. You need to build that in here too. What can you do to elevate the atmosphere as soon as things kick off, as soon as that camera turns on, as soon as people enter the room? There's the glitches of technology. There's even little things like you're on mute. Well, how do you feel when someone says you're on mute? Oh God, I'm stupid. But how do you feel if they say, we can't hear you? Now I don't feel stupid. Now that's just an observation as opposed to you did something. Even the language we use, how we handle those technical glitches and so on, can go a long way in terms of adding some warmth and building those relationships. But it takes a lot of extra effort to be able to do that here.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things that I noticed in your content when you're talking about your speaking engagements. You show up early and you've used every platform up there, but you still show up and you do the tech runs through them and you chat with the people who are running the stuff behind the scenes, and you take a lot of extra effort to make sure that they feel comfortable, even though you're confident in your abilities to show up and handle everything at the time. You've invested in that extra effort.
Absolutely. And I just did a live event here in Toronto, and it's exactly the same thing. I showed up early. I got there. She introduced me to the folks at the host introduced me to the folks in the AV station. We got on like a house on fire because we both know the drill. And I said, she goes, do you need anything else? I'm like, I'm good. I'm going to get myself a water. I know you have a busy day ahead. You go do your thing. I'm well taken care of over here. Don't worry. I keep thinking, how can I make your life easier? Whether that's live and in person or here in this technical world. Who are the people that I can give additional contact info to in case something goes wrong, in case we have a technical issue of some kind? Who are those folks that I can email the deck to in advance just in case something happens on the day of? What are those things that you could do to make the other person's life easy, that it's not begging them or kissing their butts or whatever it is? There's a negative connotation associated with going too far off the deep end in terms of being a service-oriented individual. You're not being taken advantage of by making someone's life easier. You are doing that when you say, please walk all over me. And that's a different set of context. I find any opportunity I can to make someone's life easy, to build a little bit of rapport, goes a long way, or during and after, when it comes to referrals and something down the line as well.
My dog is going crazy. This is
clearly I said something that excites them.
My daughter went outside. That's what's going on. You get a damn week when everybody's schedule is just all up in the air. That's the benefit of having a hybrid remote center of excellence. This is what happens when you have the dog barking. You just keep going.
Absolutely. You've learned. I mean, I've seen some pretty crazy things in these virtual rooms too. And that's another thing too, is I have seen people who had to cover the camera because a naked husband was walking by or something like that. They were embarrassed. And it's like, oh, that's just another one of those major things that happens. Don't sweat it. How can you make that person comfortable? How can you say, feel free to turn off your camera if this is a bad day, or blur out your background? I won't be offended, or don't mind messes and children and any of those things. When I'm running training programs with folks, that's one of the first things I say. I say, you're all adults. If you have to mute yourselves, if you have to turn off the camera and so on, I have an expectation you're going to be here in the room, but I get it. Stuff happens. You're not going to be reprimanded for it. I assume we have a mutual level of respect that you will do your best based on your circumstances.
And that's that team agreement that a lot of employers are trying to negotiate right now. People have clear expectations of what has to happen. And as long as you've got like that clear understanding that communication is setting those guardrails, that sets everybody up better to negotiate what's going on, right?
Absolutely. That's a negotiation in itself, like making sure that we are coming to the table, coming to this meeting with a level of expectations that we're both agreeing on. And that's going to make things go a lot smoother.
Yeah, exactly. I love that idea. And I think that's where a lot of organizations are at right now, where they have to take the effort and become a lot more transparent about what their expectations are and allow safety for people to speak up and ask for what it is they need.
That trust is incredibly important. I just read an article the other day, I wish I could remember where it came from, about how companies who are monitoring their staff working
Mm.
remotely are losing them.
Yes.
That is just a very clear signal of, I don't trust you. Fine. If you have somebody on your team who shouldn't be trusted, then get rid of them or don't bring them in or whatever that might be. But if you, I sense you're not trusting me and I feel like I'm being held under a microscope, I'm not going to do my best work. You're probably going to lose me some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And I come from customer service and I come from financial services. I know that there are certain circumstances in which you have to be
Sure.
monitored because it's regulatory, right?
Yeah.
The institutions themselves are subject to that regulation. And there's real reason for it, right? Because things can end up in court. And that's a lot of times the evidence that's presented in court, right?
That's a liability issue. That's not a trust issue.
Exactly. That's right. But it does become a trust issue because one of the reasons I actually changed jobs way back in 2019 is because the technology actually got to the point where they could pull individual calls and they could take a look at like numbers and who you're calling, when you're calling. And then I would start to get interrogated about why I'd made a call at specific times to that specific person using that specific number. And I'm like, why are you monitoring this?
Hmm.
Because the output, the outcome in terms of what I was just achieving hadn't changed, but it's like now all of a sudden you're monitoring like which numbers I call, like why? And that's becomes the you don't trust me to do my job. And why do you feel that you need that level of monitoring? Because at this point, I'm almost 50 years old and I've worked for you for 17 and a half years. And if you don't trust me to do the work that I feel that I need to do to get that result, then why am I here?
That's the interesting thing, like that line between liability versus trust, because I completely understand if they need to keep their T's crossed and their I's dotted to make sure that they don't end up in court or that nothing illegal is happening, because sometimes people just don't know what they're doing or how that affects other people down the road. I totally get it. But we find over and over again, companies who give people, let's say, unlimited vacation time rarely abuse it.
Yeah.
People who give them the flex time to get your work done have happier folks and more productive folks. It's those types of things. If you need to not just put up guardrails, but suffocate people along the path, then you're not going to get the best out of them and you're not creating an environment that's going to get you the best results.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it becomes a privacy issue as well, too. If you're monitoring people to that point, especially if they're working from home, what else are you collecting that you don't even understand what you're collecting? What are you seeing and how are you safeguarding that information as well, too? Because then it becomes a different liability, right?
It gets very complex.
It does get very complex. Exactly. That's right. But there is something that I wanted to pivot to, if that's okay. You do a lot of work with the Women's Executive Board in Toronto, right? You're an advisor for them?
It formerly called the Network of Executive Women. Now it's called Next Up as of about 6 months ago.
Oh, okay. One of the things that comes up frequently and has over the pandemic as well is that women are doing themselves a disservice by asking for more flexibility working from home. And I hate that concept. But are you seeing that's reality? Are people feeling that they are being left behind and that they are not getting the promotions, they're not getting the momentum that they want to have in their career because they're not in the room where it happens?
I do think that there's a reality that we have to come to terms with when it comes to that. If you're going to compare the person who is in the room versus the person who is remote, there's going to be that contact that the other person have. That's a lot more seconds in the day where they have to build those relationships, that warmth and so on. It's that visual reminder that this person is sitting there in front of me versus out of sight, out of mind. Even if all that happens is in the workday, that person who's in the office shows up to a boardroom and only sees the boss in the boardroom for that hour of the day, then maybe all things are equal. But the reality is they're going to see them in the elevator. They're going to see them in the kitchen. They're going to have a chit chat with them. And that person who's working from home has a disadvantage and they've got to do that same work we talked about earlier to make sure that they maintain those same sticky relationships, that they can play catch up, that they make an effort every often to be in the room, whether that is more frequent catch-ups in the calendar, doing them remotely, or every often I'm going to go into the office to make sure I bridge those gaps. I do think that we have to be cognizant of the fact that this is simply the brain, how the brain works. It's not just the quality, but it's also the frequency that we see people. That's those impressions that we have in the subconscious. While I don't think it's a conscious penalization, it's not a conscious penalty. It is truly something that we still need to be mindful of. When everybody was working from home, it was a level playing field. But if you're going to have those different relationships in different space and time physically, then you need to understand that there may be a price to pay for that.
Yeah. When I was working remotely, I found it just distracting or disturbing because I had worked for that organization for 16 years. And when I went 100% remote and changed jobs, I lost access to the building. I didn't have a pass that allowed me to get into the office. And that created more problems for me because in order to even build relationships and maintain them, I had to negotiate even access. And I stepped on toes to be able to even get there because my boss couldn't give me access because they didn't have access to the building, and neither did their boss. And that's where I'm passionate about, like, that transparency and those guardrails. Nobody told me I was going to lose that ability to negotiate and network when I switch jobs like that. And that's where these are the things that elevate the experience. And that's what hybrid remote excellence is, looking at that employee experience. That I have for you is about how do you optimize how you negotiate? You have this fabulous quiz that I found on your website, which is useful. I found it incredibly accurate for me. I am a collaborating negotiator. But how do we take this into effect when we're negotiating team agreements like this between the organization, the individual manager, and the people that are on the team? Everybody has a different agenda, right? Everybody has a different reason that they want flexibility. How does that work in a team environment, and why is it important?
I'm not at all surprised that you are a collaborative negotiator. And in fact, most of I'd say the women's groups that I deal with are all full of collaborative negotiators, but generally by nature. And there's a lot of statistics around negotiation and genders at work and gender bias and all that kind of stuff. Generally by nature, women are conditioned to be more collaborative because being competitive has brought a lot of backlash in the past in negotiation. Women do deal with gender bias on a regular basis. There is more discrimination, there's more aggression, there's more of those labels of greedy and bitchy and so on for people who assert themselves. Asserting yourself in a collaborative manner reduces some of the noise or some of that friction that can come with negotiation. I think naturally women are conditioned to fall into that category because of just learned experience. So when it comes to team dynamics and working with someone, it's great to be collaborative. Obviously, that by definition means you are working with people versus against them. However, you need to be cognizant of the other people in the room. If the other people in the room are not collaborative, if they are competitive, if they are the people who will do something at your expense in order to move themselves forward, if they will throw themselves under the bus, if those are the types of things that you need to be cognizant of, they are not in a collaborative mindset, then you can't have the expectation that they're going to come with a joint mutual objective. How do you get them there? That in itself is a negotiation. You need to find a reason to make them want to be collaborative. What is in it for them to want to work with you versus against you? Is it that they're going to look like a better team player for their manager? Is it that it is a checkbox on the road to becoming the next team leader if they are seen as somebody who's working with you? Is it that you have something that they need, that there's a level of dependency on you? Interestingly, what was going through my head when you mentioned the pass scenario, that you needed someone just to let you in the freaking building. You are now dependent on that individual, which means your power has gone down significantly. The more you need somebody, the less power you have. In this scenario, if you have somebody who's competitive, they think that they can do something at your expense because they have the power to do. How can you make them see that they are in fact more dependent on you than they realize? Is it that you have the ear of somebody more senior or a client or one? Is it that you are an influencer in a way that they are not in some way? Is it that you have the power to give them time off, access, any of those things, data? Even a very junior person in an environment can be extremely powerful. I still remember my first job after school, after I finished my MBA, I was working for L'Oreal. I was an analyst in the building. I was nothing on the scale of the corporate world, of the corporate ladder. But every Monday morning, the entire organization was waiting on my reports on the Walmart business. And I was running all sorts of Excel spreadsheets and graphs and all that kind of stuff. Everybody knew my name via email because those emails came directly from me. I made sure they came directly from me and not via my boss.
Ah,
They were hanging on my every word because they were waiting on the data from me. They were requesting specialized reports from me, much that I was like spread too thin. And I said to my boss, I can't do all these specialized reports. She's like, for who? What? She had to step in and say, you can't keep asking my person for all these specialized things. You want something, you're going to have to ask me for it. She stepped in and helped me to say no because it felt like I didn't have the power to do that with them. It's about managing those power dynamics. No matter how junior or how senior you are, you have something they want. That is why they are in a room with you. That is why they have to work with you in some way, shape, or form. That's why they're not able to just be a lone ranger and do their thing. If you're dealing with someone who is very competitive, you need to make sure you are explicit in helping them to understand how dependent they are on you and why it's in their benefit to work with you. Now, you still need to be diplomatic in how you do that, as opposed to going, you need me. That's not going to go over very well. And that is not a collaborative style, but it's understanding those things. It's recognizing one of the reasons the quiz is important. And I tell everybody I meet to do it is because your self-awareness is one of the major keys to your success. The more self-aware you are, the more you start to recognize those things in other people too. If you know what makes you collaborative, it's very easy to spot and articulate that they don't have that same quality or that same action that you are taking. You're going to be able to pick up on that much more easily and work around it. It's now an obstacle in your path, one that you can plan an alternative path to get through.
you want to know what I did with the pass issue? I got involved in the employee resource groups, and I also volunteered for doing videos to help with change management because they had a new office and they were trying to educate people about how to use the office and the booking system and all of that stuff. And in order to do those videos, I needed access to the office to be able to give them content that they could then use to educate their employees. And then the other thing I did was found an ERG myself for parents and caregivers. And the benefit was that I ended up getting the pass and the access that I needed. But the trade-off that I offered them was I will highlight your leadership that is empowering me to be able to do this.
You changed the power dynamics. You made them dependent on you, and you found how am I valuable to them right now? What power do I have? How can I leverage something? And that makes them want to work with you. That is the cornerstone of being a collaborative negotiator.
And it did change the power dynamics until they restructured my role. But I wouldn't have done this podcast. There you go. What advice do you have for people right now? Because a lot of the things that come up are transactional. It's like, how do we negotiate a salary negotiation in this particular economic environment? How do we get flexibility? Are there myths that we need to counteract right now that people are buying into because everybody feels fear in the environment?
I would say one of the mistakes people make is they go in cold. I want something, I'm going to set up a meeting and I'm going to ask for that thing. Before you ask for that thing, what are the other steps along the way that you can manage expectations? Is there information you need to dig up about who has the passes and all of that kind of stuff? Is there seeds that you can plant to make them understand how dependent they are on you? Is there some things that you can do in terms of if it's a salary increase? Are there other people who can sing your praises before you even go in there? One of the things that I've even done in the past is I've worked in a lot of male dominated environments where I was the only woman on the team or I was the youngest on the team. And I didn't have access to some of the locker rooms and the pubs and those, even smoking meetings. I wasn't a smoker. Who else is in that room that can be advocating on your behalf? So it's not just you and this 1 hour of negotiation. There's so many touch points before that negotiation happens. Some of them are with you, some of them are with others. That when I was aiming for a salary increase, I had one of my champions who had the ear of the CEO, who then told the person who reported to him, hey, you need to do something about this person before we lose her, or you need to do something about this person. She's a superstar. We want to make sure we don't lose her. We want to make sure she stays a long time. It wasn't a direct path to my manager who had the power to increase my salary. It was a very indirect route. There was a lot more steps to get to that same destination, but it was a successful trek to that destination because I took those extra steps. You need to think about where's the destination, but what are all the steps you're going to have to take to get there? You can't assume you're just going to be able to leap over some of those giant obstacles. You're going to have to do some work in order to get there in the first place.
How can you influence the pieces? It's going to line up better for you, right?
You're removing obstacles when you have someone else who's doing things, when you have data. Like I always tell people, too often, one of the most common negotiations I hear about is, okay, it's the end of the year and I'm getting my salary increase and they've only gave me this much and I'm unhappy with it. How do I negotiate higher? Really late to the game. It's not impossible, but it's difficult because guess what happened? Let's say December 1st, they told you, hey, congratulations, you're getting a 2% salary increase. A month before that, a bunch of executives sat in the room and said, we have this much money to distribute amongst all of our team, who's going to get what salary increases. And a month before that, your boss might have been sitting with you or maybe not have been sitting with you talking about all of your achievements for the year. Or maybe you were just out of sight, out of mind. They had no idea what your achievements were, that when they went in for that executive roundtable about who's singing whose praises, who deserves these raises the most, and who can we afford to give the bare minimum to, either they were talking loudly about you or you were out of their minds completely. That negotiation for your salary that is granted to you on December 1st happened way back in August and September. That's when it started. It's about what are those little steps along the way? What's that decision-making process? And how can I influence every single point in that decision-making process? Part of it is formal stuff, having a regular, maybe it's a quarterly catch up with your boss to talk about some of your achievements and what you want and how you're on track to achieve so many great things this year and what else can you do to make sure that you do that. So it's not a surprise at the end of the year when they go, well, you didn't prove yourself the way we were expecting to. What? Did you have a one-on-one? Did you have informal meetings with folks to understand what are the expectations for someone at your level? What does success look like? How can you measure it? Have you been good about communicating those quantitative metrics, not just the qualitative, I'm a team player kind of stuff? Do you have data to support those kind of things? And when did you provide that data? Who are you providing it to? Are you relying on just that one person, just that one manager? Or are there other people who are singing your praises or could be singing your praises to get you there one step or 5 steps faster? There's so many influencers on that decision-making process, and I'd be looking for all of those things along the way.
I always wrote my mid-year as if it was the final, this like basically setting it up to say, this is what I've achieved and this is what I expect to achieve, and document everything. Like my mid-year was almost as long as the final. With 200 pages of attachments to prove it.
This is your opportunity to show them that you're on track and to make sure that you don't go off track, because you might think you're doing well. And then at the end of the year, they went, oh, that wasn't what I was expecting from you. This was. That's also an information gathering opportunity. It's a chance for you to ask those questions. One of the things that I hear from people all the time is they say, well, I'm not ready yet. Okay, when will you be ready? They couldn't give me a timeline. I don't want a timeline. I want specifics. What in their minds says ready? What can you prove? I don't want vague stuff from them. I want you to go in there prepared to drill down and to probe what ready looks like, what success looks like to them. That later on, when you go back and you go, hey, remember 6 months ago when you said success looks like this and this, I've hit all those marks. If they were vague, then they'd be able to go, that's not exactly what I meant by this marker of success. You need to go in there and go on a fact-finding mission, as well as relaying, here's all the great stuff that I'm doing. You need to make sure you are setting them up to say yes to you later.
No, that's excellent. And I think that I do that instinctively. But
probably a lot of us do, but sometimes we need little reminders along the way.
Exactly. What is your collaboration style? Since
my negotiation style is definitely collaborative. I love to get creative. I tell people are afraid of negotiating with me, but I'm always telling them, like, I'm always open to creative solutions. Why should we be in a box? Let's throw the box across the room and not worry about that. But I am cognizant of the people who are super competitive. I have been on a team before where we've done similar kind of assessments, and I was the only one of 15 people who was in the collaborative box. It's a group of high achievers. You're going to have a lot of competitive folks. I am well aware of those things, and I will advocate to change the way we are even measured. Like when I was a consultant, I told my boss, I think we need to be on a team goal, not an individual goal, because that's when you're going to be elbowing each other out of the way. But if you give us a team goal, then people are going to naturally be more collaborative. If you are set up in a way where you're being evaluated on individual stuff only, then what do you expect to happen? You're just cannibalizing the company's sales or the company's outcomes. Whereas how can you structure things in such a way? But I'm hyper aware of the people around me. I'm also surrounded by a lot of very passive people. There's a lot of those people who are accommodators, which can be great, but there's people who don't even want to come to the negotiation. And I have to coax them and go, what can you do? Because they hear a proposal from me and they go, I don't know what to do with that. Talk to me a little bit more. Like, you need a probe to get it out of them, and you can bring them into a more collaborative space. But I love working with collaborators because the sky's the limit. The only catch is it can take us a long time to get there. You need to be conscious of some of those guardrails.
And that's the downfall. It's just like you pay attention to stuff that isn't ultimately essential for the end goal. It's more about being super focused and strategic. So
yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, I still need to pay my bills. In some way, those have to be top of the priority list.
exactly, that's right. All right, that was a fabulous conversation. Is there anything else that you want to leave people with, a tidbit that you find always useful?
I named the book Say Less, Get More for a reason. I would say that is something that I hope people take out of this in many ways, shapes, and forms. It is the simplicity of just shutting up and letting other people give you valuable information. It's a simplicity of shutting up and allowing your brain to allow that rational thought to come back in before you talk yourself out of a deal. It's a simplicity of pausing to be more self-aware of what's going on with you and others in the room right now. That's a mantra that I hope people take away forever. And if you want to learn more about it, you can also go to saylessgetmore.com to find more helpful tips to get there.
I was going to say the comfort with silence is important. And I think that there's a rush to fill the space, but you do yourself a disservice when you do that. Perfect. I will make sure the quiz is in the show notes, your website, the book. Anything else I should add in there?
No, the quiz is fotiniicon.com/quiz. The course and the book is all at saylessgetmore.com. And people are welcome to follow along on Instagram, where I answer questions and give advice there all the time at Fotini Icon, and my handles everywhere, LinkedIn and all the rest too.